that God had revealed to him that I was to partake in God's life through him by surrendering my body, soul, and spirit. He also mentioned that other girls would go through him in a similar manner. His words were strange, but I was too shocked to respond. The following day after that Sunday worship service, Apollo C. Quiboloy left for Manila, while I was left to carry on with my duties, including organizing carolers for our annual fundraising. Confusion consumed me. I felt betrayed by my faith, by him, and even perhaps by myself. I began questioning whether what had happened was indeed God's will or simply a gross abuse of power. When I returned to Manila, I was once again instructed to sleep in his room. Fear gripped me, but defying the anointing of God was unthinkable. We had been taught that such disobedience would invite a curse. The next morning, he asked if I understood God's revelation. I remained silent, unable to process what had happened. He then referenced me to Philippians chapter 2, verses 6 to 12, explaining that just as Jesus humbled himself and obeyed God, even to the point of death, so he too must obey God's will by partaking in carnal things. He claimed this was necessary for him to understand the human experience and to fully empathize with others. He even told me that he had also been reluctant to accept God's revelation, but as God's chosen one, he had no choice but to act on it. I was more confused with his explanation, but I could not complain. I wanted to go out from the ministry, but I lacked courage. I did not know where to ask help. I had cut all the bridges behind my life, and I could hardly go back because it would mean starting all over again. My family was poor, and I had no connections. My option was to stay because I was still bothered with what if it was indeed God's will. December of the same year was an escape for me. Caroling as one of our sources of funds, and which had been participated in by every member of the ministry all over the country, became my excuse of staying away from the worker's house in Manila where he stayed. In January 1994, I was in his room with Ingrid Canada, the international coordinator of the church, Tessie Dandan, the national administrator for the church in the Philippines, and Felina Salinas, his personal assistant. During that...
Miss Teresita, before you continue po, yung nabanggit nyo ng 2 beses, Ingrid Canada, nandito po ba siya sa harapan ninyo?
Yes, patabi po siya ni Mr. Quiboloy.
Sila po, yung nagtaas ng kamay. All right, salamat po. Please proceed, Miss Teresita.
During that meeting, he informed the girls that I would be included in the inner circle. Right there and then, I realized that these women had likely endured similar experiences. Without any words, we shared a mutual understanding. None of us dared speak about what had happened to us. In February 1994, I was sent to Hong Kong, still carrying all the confusions and emotional turmoil. Despite this, I continued to pretend that everything was fine. When one of our musicians, J.C. Pangilinan, was scheduled to return to the Philippines, I seized the opportunity to send a personal letter to ACQ. In that letter, I poured out my feelings, openly expressing my emotional distress. I was honest about how deeply shocked I was to learn of his life beyond the pulpit. The man I had revered as a holy figure was in reality an ordinary mortal, one who had exploited my genuine commitment and dedication to God. My faith wavered, and everything I had once believed was shattered. I prepared myself for a harsh response, expecting a violent reaction from him. To my surprise, there was none. Instead, I was sent back here. Upon my return, I was even more surprised to learn that I had been promoted. I was appointed National Crusade Coordinator, National Logistics Coordinator, and Luzon Area Administrator all at once. This was a sudden and significant promotion from every previous role. By God's grace, I excelled in all my assigned tasks. Despite this, fear gripped me every time Apollo Quiboloy would come to Manila. My only relief was when one of the girls would accompany him, giving me an excuse not to sleep with him. I kept myself busy, visiting satellite churches to distract my confusion and agony. One day, ICC confronted me saying, ACQ sensed my distance. I made my work an excuse. February 15, 1998, ACQ used me again. It was always out of fear that I obeyed, a fear mixed with anxiety that he might knew how I pretended to be extremely grateful that he allowed me to be a part of his physical life, because in all honesty, and God truly knew I was not. All the pent-up emotions suffocated me that on the following day, while preparing for church, I collapsed. ACQ performed mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but later I learned, he told others, that it was just a way for me to seduce him, labeling me as Jezebel the Temptress. I believe Apollo Carrion Quiboloy understood that I never wanted the life he was trying to impose on me. My decision to dedicate my life to God's service was driven by a sincere desire for spiritual purification from the sins I had committed before becoming a full-time worker. I had only one goal: to live a holy life and ultimately to attain heaven. As the Bible says in Colossians chapter 3, verse 5, I quote, "Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature, sexual immorality, impurity, lust." But how could I achieve this with the circumstances that I was in? Disobedience and complaints were never an option. Anyone who did so was labeled as carnal, as someone who did not overcome the flesh.